Peace and blessings. This is Rayesa Gheewala, the Divorced Muslimah Coach. So today I'm talking about marriage, half your deen. And this is such a hot topic because we are, marriage is such a hot topic in general, but we are actually in a marriage crisis in our ummah. And in order to figure out what is going on in our marriages, why are we having so many divorces, what is going on? And it's not the issue of that someone is getting divorced. It's the issue of what are the state of our marriages? Why are there so many divorces that are splitting up families and causing disruption in the home and causing disruption in our society, right? We need whole, healthy, functioning people, families, relationships in order to have a thriving society. So that's what it's more about. And today's topic is really all about what does it mean when your marriage fulfills half your deen? What does that look like? And the common misconception really is, okay, well, I'm getting married, so I'm fulfilling half my deen. And does it really mean that if you have gotten married, then half of your deen is fulfilled? Does it mean that when you do the act of signing a nikah, having a nikah contract or a marriage contract, does that mean that it fulfills half your deen? And what does that really even mean, fulfilling half your deen, right? Because there's so much investment, time, energy, focus on the wedding, right? Planning and preparing for the wedding, the venue, and everything that gets, all the details that get focused on and addressed in terms of what this wedding is going to look like, what this party is going to look like, right? There's so much planning and prep that goes on there, rather than the development of oneself and bringing oneself into a relationship, into a marriage, right? Hey Salaha, good to see you. And so that's what it's going to be really about, right? Because the reality is I'm going to go into a little bit deeper of what does it mean by half your deen. But before I get there, I want to just point out that relationships can be really, really messy, right? And that's part of life. That's part of of life here on this earth, is learning to interact with each other, learning to have interactions with each other, have a dynamic with each other, get along with each other, and learn to live with each other. Hey, the dope Muslim woman in the house. Good to see you. I'm so glad that you two ladies are here with me. Feel free to hop in, jump in, and share takeaways, questions, thoughts as I'm talking. And so getting back to relationships can be messy, right? And the beauty of that is we get to always choose how we're going to show up in a relationship, how we're going to respond in each moment, right? We were created with free choice, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the ability to have free choice at every moment, to choose how we're going to think, to respond, and that's part of what makes it messy. So one of the things that I want to talk about is that in a relationship like marriage, and marriage with your partner, with your spouse, there are certain relationships that are so intimate that will always trigger within you. You can call it your wounds, you can call it your hurts, you can call it places within you that need tending to, places within you that need healing, places within you that need attention, right? And those relationships that are going to trigger the places within you are going to be your most intimate relationship, right? Your relationship with your parents, your relationship with your children, your relationship with your partner and your spouse. We don't divorce our parents or our children, right? However, you notice how, when we're in these intimate relationships, how we show up with these people, parents, children, spouse, the behavior we have towards them, how we show up, how our character is reflected in these relationships versus how it's reflected in the outside of these relationships, at work, at the grocery store, at the car wash. How do you show up with those people, right? Hey Saror, good to see you. Tiger Nut Drink, good to see you. And Jamada Maharam, thank you for joining. And so what I was saying, going back to what I was saying, that these intimate relationships, we're talking about marriage here, is going to be the place where your hurts, pains, wounds, places that need to be tended within you are going to be triggered. Okay? And the trigger is basically the signal that something needs to be addressed within you, right? Your feelings that are coming up underneath. And I'm going to say that when this happens, and it does happen all the time, it is so much more helpful to direct them inward, seeing it as your feelings, seeing it as, oh, this is a trigger, this is a warning, this is a signal that I need to look inward, I need to look at myself, rather than you made me feel this way, right? And just that whole statement, when you did this, when you said this, you made me feel this. This whole statement is a big misunderstanding, because no one and nothing can make us feel anything, right? So when we're living in this misunderstanding that our feelings are coming from outside of ourselves, so thereby justifying the response, justifying the reaction of our feelings. We're feeling anger, we're going to feel justified in lashing out. And most of the time, this is done reactively and unconsciously, that you're just reacting because you're in the heat of the moment, of the anger, of the frustration, of the resentment, whatever is going on underneath that you may not understand or recognize in the moment, but you're feeling it, right? So why am I even saying this? Is because when we're living in this misunderstanding that someone or something outside of you is making you and causing you to feel a certain something, it's going to look like they're the problem. It's going to look like they need to be fixed. It's going to look like they need to change, which these are all things we don't have control over, right? However, what we do have control of, and I know that you've heard this all the time, you have control over how you choose to respond to whatever you're receiving from the outside, okay? So, because how many times in a marriage do we feel justified in how we use our tongue, how we use our words, and I'll go a little bit deeper in that. Like, what do I mean by that? It's not just what we're saying, it's how we're saying, it's the tonality, it's the body language, it's the energy that we're exchanging with the person in front of us. Then how else do we respond, right? There's many other ways that we respond to how we feel. We can perhaps withhold affection, withhold resources, right? Because, and this carries into all of our relationships. Even think about your relationship with your child, right? You get upset. Do you withhold? Do you give silent treatment? Do you take something away, right? Do you threaten? Okay, well, since you did this, then I'm not going to do this. Well, since you did this, then I'm going to do this, right? These are all different ways of coping that we may not realize. And Salha is saying respond versus react. Yes. So this is all about owning our feelings rather than dumping them, or projecting is another word we hear a lot, onto other people, right? And so, look, I'm going to bring it back to this statement from Rumi, right? If you are irritated by every rub, how will you be polished? So what does that mean? that means that is in reference to the polishing of the heart, right? Because that signal, that feeling is signaling to you, okay, well, what's going on internally for me? What's going on with the condition of my heart? What's going on in my spiritual state that's leading to my emotional state, that's leading to my physical actions and behavior, right? So getting back to marriage, half your deen, that whole statement. Well, what is the purpose of marriage, right? Like when we think about it that way, we have to know our intention of everything that we're doing, and we have to know the purpose behind it, right? So if we're looking at marriage and we're seeing it as half our deen, and we're looking at it as a way to serve Allah, a way to worship Allah, well then Allah has to be included in that equation, right? Allah has to be between you and your partner and your spouse, right? So going back to what I said, we get to choose how we're going to respond in every moment. So if going back to, if we're believing that something outside of us, someone, what they're saying, what they're doing is causing us to feel a certain way, we will become justified in how we choose to respond. And even if it's a reaction and you're not consciously aware that you said something or did something that you later on take back or you didn't mean, we still have that choice. It's just where our level of consciousness is not at the level that we're aware of what we're doing. We're living in reactionary mode, right? However, we're still responsible for our actions. We're still responsible for our behavior. Like we can't disown that and get away from that. So what I meant by this part becomes messy is because what actually makes it half your deen is how you're showing up in the marriage. Is it in a manner that is pleasing to Allah? Then it becomes fulfilling half your faith, right? Are you showing up with this person that you agreed to be in a contract with? Of course, there's rights, roles, responsibilities, all of that, right? But we're not talking about that right now. That's all included. What we're talking about is how we are choosing to show up. Is it in a way, and yes, is it in a way that's pleasing to Allah, right? And we think about the definition of ihsan. Ihsan is responding in a way or behaving in a way that even though we don't see Allah, we know that He sees us, right? Yeah, so Jamada Muharram is saying, yes, in those negative moments. Yeah, explain to me what you mean by negative moments. We try not to differentiate negative, positive moments, but tell me a little bit about what does that mean to you, negative moments, and what and because when we say that, then what's the next step? Where does that lead to, right? So going back to whatever is happening in the interactions that you're having with your partner, is it in a manner that's pleasing to Allah? Whether even if it's a heated discussion, if it's an argument, is it a fight? Are you allowing your ego to keep doing this, or you're going to pause and reflect, or just pause and step away? You know, sometimes we can't reflect in that moment when our feelings are consuming us, right? And the other point is that to remembering what was the point of the marriage, what is the purpose of the marriage, and I think we can take it all back to why are we even here? What is our purpose for existence here, right? And can marriage be one of those means of worshiping Allah, of pleasing Allah, right? While also fulfilling so many other things that marriage does fulfill for us as human beings. The next step in this is to remember that each one of us, myself and you, are here on this earth as a representative of Allah. We're here because we testified and we took ownership of being a Khalifa, right? And that means that we are here as a representative of God on earth. So are we mirroring, are we reflecting Allah's qualities, right? Who Allah is, in all of our interactions. And we're talking specifically about marriage here. So are we able to reflect Allah's qualities, reflect who Allah is in our interaction with our spouse? And if we're not, that's something for us to figure out. That's something for us to figure out why, what's holding us back, what's getting in the way, right? Because we can't just say to Allah, well, he did this, this, and this, and he made me feel like this, and he did that. That's why I behave this way, right? That's not going to cut it or fly, because we have to take ownership of our actions and our behavior. We're not judged for our thoughts. We're not judged for our feelings. We're judged for our intention and our action and our behavior. And so, all of our interactions, and this is a side tangent, but even our interactions with as a parent with our children, we're representing God when we are talking to our child. So when we're being harsh, when we're being judgmental, when we're being disrespectful or rude, or approaching them in a harsh, rude manner, we're representing God to our children as well, right? And so again, this goes back to when I talked about feelings. We have to understand that, and I mentioned, what is your spiritual state? We have to understand that we are spiritual beings. We're a soul housed in a physical body, having a spiritual experience, because our psychological experience, our feelings, our thoughts, and how we're experiencing life is a spiritual experience, because we're a soul, right? And we're having this spiritual experience in a physical world that we live in the dunya. So it goes back to the spiritual experience, right? When we speak, when we approach, when we interact with our spouse, are we doing it with Allah between us, right? Are we doing it as an act of worship, or has that? And it happens. Those things fall out of our radar. Those things, when we're in our feelings, when we're in our emotions, those things fall to the back of our mind, and we don't remember those things, right? And that's why it's not about necessarily having it in the front of our mind, but it's more about it's a state of being. What is our spiritual state, right? And we think about how we treat the ones that we love the most versus how we treat strangers or employees or our employer or anyone on the street. It's something to reflect on. I mean, I've certainly found that I could always have a smile on and be my most kind self with those people. But when it came time to my partner, my spouse, a lot of my resentments, my frustrations, and my anger and my blame came out in my interactions. And at that time, I didn't have the consciousness or the conscious awareness that I have now to be able to reflect and see those were all things that I needed to correct within myself, rather than point the finger and blame my partner for things that I was feeling, right? So it's like, do you have a control over yourself, your tongue, your anger, or those things controlling you, right? So I talked a little bit about marriage being half your deen. We're talking about the wedding here. We're talking about the actual act of getting married. We're talking more about our interactions. When we are showing up in a manner pleasing to Allah, that is what fulfills your half your deen. Because it's not easy. Because when you get triggered in those hurts, those pains, those wounds, those messy feelings, it's very easy to lose it and just look like the person in front of you is the cause for all of this, and then for you to dump it all out there, right? However, when we understand and recognize that's not how it works, and that we're always in charge and control and accountable for how we respond. So the other part of this marriage being half your deen, right? Our deen, or our religion, is all about our interactions with each other, our dealings with each other, right? And we're talking specifically about marriage, but this could be with our children, with society, with our business, with our career, right? And if we're doing our religion, there is really to teach us. We're talking about deen here, right? And it's there to teach us what that looks like. It's there really to allow for growth, spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, to elevate ourselves if we can allow that space for ourselves and for our partner without feeling threatened or insecure that the person's growth in front of us is not about us. Thanks for joining, Saliha. I'd love to hear your takeaways, and talk soon, inshallah. So, that's what it means by fulfilling half your deen, right? Having the understanding and having the understanding of where you're at. And today's topic was all about what is meant by half your deen, and how is marriage, not the wedding, but the marriage, the relationship that you're in day out with your partner, how is that described or defined as fulfilling half your deen, right? So we talked about that a little bit, but I want to leave you with what's the solution, right? And the solution from what I see, from what I've learned and how I've grown, and is two things. Is number one is understanding your psychology, your feelings, knowing what they mean, what they don't mean, knowing, what is your truth, what is the truth, how do you tell the difference between it, knowing that your psychology, your psychological experience is a spiritual experience. Just as I described earlier, it stems from your spiritual state. Understanding and knowing that your feelings affect your behavior, right? And the roles that your thoughts play in it, right? And the second part is understanding who you truly authentically are. And we hear that as a cliche all the time, be your authentic true self. What the heck does that mean, right? Where do you derive that definition? Where do you get that understanding from? Is really all about knowing your true fitra soul. So that means shedding your personality, whatever that means, wherever you got that from. Shedding all these labels, shedding what people's opinions and thoughts and words about you are, shedding even what you think you are, who you think you are, right? Because we're never going to know who we are as a true, authentic fitra soul unless we know and connect to our Creator, and seeing ourselves through Allah's eyes, Allah's lens, Allah's words, right? And seeing ourselves with the privilege and the honor and the value and the respect as being designated as a representative of God here on this earth, right? And I didn't get that until so recently. Like, I am a Khalifa. But that's part of my identity. I am here to represent God in all of my interactions with people. Like, do I understand that? Do I understand what that means? Or what does that require of me, right? And the last part is knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already endowed us with all of the resources, tools, our heart, our soul, our fitra, our intellect, and all of that, to be able to step into that identity of being a Khalifa, a representative of God on this earth. And we've just shifted away from it and to come back to it. So I know I've done a lot of talking here, and there's quite a few of you guys on here. So share with me your takeaways, your questions, what made sense, what didn't. And if you're watching this on the replay, let me know your takeaways. I want to hear them. And if this was helpful for you to understand what is it meant by fulfilling half your deen through marriage, right? Through marriage. Oh, you know what? I wanted to mention that somebody shared with me, one of my groups, what is meant by marriage fulfilling half your deen, and the response that she gave me was that to her, what it meant was that your carnal needs are met, right? You cultivate deep and meaningful union for the sake of Allah, and inshallah you receive the blessing of offspring. I thought that was a beautiful representation, because as being human, we do have human needs, carnal needs, however way you want to describe them, right? Physical needs. where that marriage is a means to fulfill those. But I love the part where she says, for the sake of Allah. Like, you're going into this relationship for Allah's sake. How many relationships how do we even look at our relationship by thinking that this is for the pleasure of Allah, this is for the sake of Allah, this is for the worship of Allah? Do we ever look at our relationships that way? Do we ever go into a meeting with someone, or a lunch with someone, or an interaction when you're going to go and talk to your child? Do you ever think of it as you're doing it with the intention to please Allah? Like, you're doing it for the sake of Allah? Do you ever think about it that way? I know it certainly took me a long time to understand this. And one other thing that somebody had mentioned was, what if it happens that you never get married, right? Or maybe you've been married and you're no longer married now, or but you never get married, right? And I think for that question, to understand that and to feel contented in that, is that we have to remember what our purpose is. Our purpose we're not here to be married. We didn't have to come on this earth to be married. We have a purpose of worshiping Allah, and we can do that in many different means. The love that you feel for someone, the interactions that make love come alive. We already have love within us, right? Connection, sincerity, seeing people, hearing people, offering unconditional love, not based on what they give us or what they can do for us, but love to them because we're already full with Allah's love. That's energy that we're giving out into the world. And it doesn't have to necessarily be in a marriage. There's so many different types of love that you can experience. And there's so many different ways for you to uncover and discover along your journey what are the ways that you're here to fulfill your purpose of worshiping Allah. It could be through a marriage, it could be through motherhood, it could not. That's for up to you to discover. What are your gifts, your assets, your skills, your uniqueness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you with, so you can show up with that in this world and contribute it to society as a form of worship. Jamaat Muharram is saying, when dealing with the triggers that come up looking for a partner, what are some of the suggestions for being scared about something that hasn't even happened yet? That's a great question. Well, that's exactly what I teach in my program, of understanding what your feelings mean. And here you're talking about fear. You're in a state of fear for exactly what you said, something that hasn't happened yet. You're talking about the unknown. You're talking about the future. You're talking about a realm of the ghaib, of the unknown that doesn't exist, that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has power and control over. So in our mind, when we are living from that space, we're not in the present moment, we're in the future. We're having future thinking. It's going to be insecure, unfearful thinking, because none of us knows what's going to happen in the future. So we could be building stories. We could be making up, this could happen, that could happen, and this is why it's important to understand. I'm not going to go into depth here because it's a state of understanding. It's not just me telling you this is how it works. It's a deep understanding of how we're experiencing life and what do our feelings have to do with it? Where do they come in, right? And so just to answer your question here, understand that, first of all, you're living life in the future that doesn't even exist yet. So you're living in a made-up reality. You're living in a make-believe reality of something you're conjuring up with your thinking stories based on the past, based on this person, that person could have, would have, should have, whatever, right? Those are not real. Those are just things we're gathering from different parts, past, future, maybe something happened to this person or happened to you even before, right? We're conjuring all that up and we're creating and packaging it into a story, and then we're believing it to be true in the present moment. Well, it doesn't exist in the present moment because the future hasn't happened yet. So when we're out of the present moment, we're going to feel insecure. We're going to feel fear, right? And so are we trusting that? Are we relying on the story that we've built? Or are we relying on the truth of what we know? And And that the truth of what we know is, do we know Allah? Do we know who He is? Do we know ourselves? That's where we go back to the truth. I hope I answered that question, Jumada Muharram. I'd love to hear your takeaways and any other questions when you listen to the replay. So thank you for joining me, and inshallah I will speak to you next time. Peace and blessings.